Hi all, I'm Al Daldean, the creator and producer of the LIBI podcast. This 100% volunteer-run show was born out of the Rainforest Alberta movement and features incredible people who are leaders, innovators, and have big ideas. Your host for this episode is Rea Hailley, and her guest is Dawn Leadbetter. Take it away, Rea.
Thanks, Al. I'm Rea Hailley, co-founder of New Idea Machine. Thanks so much for sitting down with me, Dawn. I'm really excited to dive into your journey and the business you've built. And to kick things off, can you tell us a little bit about what you do and why it's so important?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Great conversation and timing. So I'm a registered nurse as a professional background. And in that profession, I have worked through my career of over 18 years in different settings, understanding the ecosystem in general, the healthcare ecosystem. And over those years, you start to see the gaps and you start to understand nurses are solving problems every day. I guess we can start with that, right? And those problems get more complex over the course of your career. And that's really where I'm sitting now, having a background in critical care, which is a complex clinical setting, moving into entry to practice education and teaching students in the clinical practice setting, and then moving into quality and safety and understanding the systems level, all give me a bigger picture and kind of put all the puzzle pieces together. And when you start to see those bigger pieces, those challenges become more complex. And really, my mission is to make an environment that reduces that. And you can do the right thing and in an environment that demonstrates effectively truly embracing collaboration. Like that's really what it comes down to, because I don't know if you're familiar with the proverb, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together, right? And that's really where the healthcare ecosystem lives. Like they have to live in that collaborative mindset. We fail more often than not when we're not collaborative.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think everyone can agree that our current health system is under tremendous strain and in desperate need of a revamp.
And that's not new, unfortunately, but that's growth of complexity, right? Like as the system gets more complex, it gets a lot more difficult to make effective change. And also a change management practitioner, you appreciate what that looks like. And that's where nurses and their relationships come really into play, and building those relationships to understand all those other perspectives. And that translates to entrepreneurial worlds all day long, right? Like I have noticed using my nursing skills, direct translation into business, right? And you have to understand the problem. You have to understand different perspectives on what the potential solution could be, right? All of those things are happening in a nurse's mind every day when they're working with patients, when they're working with their colleagues, interdisciplinary colleagues, your nursing colleagues. All of those problems have a nursing solution to them.
Yes. And what specific gap did you see in your field, and how are you addressing it?
Well, the gap that I found comes from my education hat in quality and safety, and the nursing workforce crisis, right? So there were many calls to action that were being reverberated around the nursing community. We've been highlighting crisis issues for years, but not effectively getting the collaboration to solve them, right? That workforce, we need to really focus on retaining nurses first and foremost. Obviously, second is recruiting. And a lot of that comes to play in that education side of it, right? Really understanding what it takes to make a safe and competent practicing nurse. The public doesn't understand how complex it is. There's a within the profession, there isn't a very solid, defined understanding of what we do because we do so much. We work over 5 domains. We're working in education. We're working in, clinical obviously is the most obvious. Education, research, administration, right? Managing and in organizations and policy. And so there's a breadth of skills that encompass a nurse's career. And we don't really track them from the onset. We don't, all your education lives on a nurse educator's desk in a spreadsheet somewhere. And when you leave that role, those skills aren't yours. You don't have a quantifiable list of the things that you attained in that role when you move to another role and over your career, right? And there's lots of different areas where you practice. And then that leads to not understanding your transferable skills, right? And then there's redundant education. You go to an orientation and half of it, you're kind of phased out because you know this already, and engagement can be a problem. There's lots of different pieces from both perspectives of an employer versus a nurse. And it's complex to be able to identify that unless you actually have a collaborative way of defining it and meeting it. So that was the gap that I saw. And we have expectations as a profession, right? We have continuing competency expectations where our college, we need to be able to provide to our college that we are doing whatever it is that we're doing over the course of the year every time we renew our permit. And so it's very broad, but having a tool that helps a nurse do that in a more meaningful way really would lend to the motivation, first of all. And second of all, a really good understanding of the profession and the skills.
Yeah, it's shocking to me that a system isn't already in place to track this crucial information. And, when you first shared your vision with me, I think it's a brilliant idea. And I was just completely shocked. Like, what do you mean this doesn't exist already? It seems so common sense.
Well, it exists in what everybody else would call like learning management software, for example. It exists within an organization. And all of the organizations have some way, shape, or form of tracking that. Mm-hmm. But you don't have, as an individual nurse, you don't retain access to that information if you leave that organization. And that's the biggest component of it for me, is that you need to find a way to be able to move within an organization, because we do know that there's internal churn. Where, you work in one unit and then things aren't, what you need, and you try to find something new and you move to another unit. Maybe it's another hospital, but you don't lose those skills. You still have them. Mm-hmm. You just have to understand how they translate to the new environment that you're entering. And if you don't have a way of even keeping track, you lose track. Mm-hmm. Like the sheer number alone of individual skills in the data set is significant, right? But how it's applied in a different setting, that's where you can lose the connection, right? A nurse is a nurse is a nurse is not that's not a thing. Just because you're a critical care nurse, you are going to have a learning curve if you move from the Royal Alexandra ICU to the University of Alberta ICU to the, or into a different city. Even in the province of Alberta, where we have a system, it's not 100% the same skills. Like you have specialties in one hospital and that kind of thing. So you could go to a surgery ward, but there's a bunch of different types of surgeries and there's different, devices and all of that kind of stuff it's just important to know that there's variation and what you need to get up to speed. There's general information that that's transferable. And then what's going to be the priority to get you up to speed to function safely and to help you grow over time and build different skill sets that are more complex in an area.
Yeah. And was there something, perhaps it was this exact situation, but was there something that really surprised you about, this line of work?
Well, I think what surprises me, I know that even when I taught nurses that if there was something that didn't fit in a setting for you, don't be scared to go somewhere else. Like you're constantly learning and growing, and you're constantly going to have different opportunities and going somewhere different, even if it's across the hall to a different unit or a different floor in a hospital, it's a different experience. But it's all about relationships too. And I think that how we build relationships in the frame of education and how we show accountability and what the expectations are, within an organization for a manager to mentor or a CNE to mentor and educate. All of that requires a relationship that's built on transparency and in order to grow. And I think what is the most interesting piece to me that I didn't expect to see is the variation in that. And there's just a way to make it more standardized and to help give everybody the tools that they need to be able to contribute to that collaboratively, because that's where it pulls, right? Where it pulls together, it really comes together when you are a nurse, you walk onto a unit and it's very clear what your expectations are and what's expected of you. And it's very clear of the skills that you need and the things that you, in a psychologically safe environment, be able to go, ooh, I haven't done that in 6 months, a year, or whatever the case may be. I need to, and have actionable steps to take to get you to where you want to be so that you actually feel confident and you can self-assess yourself as confident in the future when you're actually have applied that knowledge, into care. You go back and you gain confidence as you do that, and being able to see that over time, right? And what that growth looks like. Those are really important pieces that they just aren't everywhere. And I want them to be everywhere. I want everybody to have that tool, to be able to do that and grow in their career and feel confident and have a long, satisfying career.
Yes, absolutely. Dawn, was there a biggest lesson or challenge that you learned during the span of your career?
Well, I think jumping into entrepreneurial world was the biggest, the biggest lesson in my career. But I think it just really comes back to relationships in general, right? Relationships are just imperative in everything that we do. And we need to rebuild those relationships as a profession. We talk about interdisciplinary relationships, but we also need intradisciplinary, like within our own profession. When you have, 4 different categories of nurses, 5 different categories of nurses, whatever it is within Alberta and other provinces, it varies. But, you all have a value and what you bring and contribute to the profession, the ecosystem, and to patients and their care. And those relationships over many years, and that's like even within a category of nursing, whether it's you're an expert or a novice or a student, and how we create that learning environment to get a nurse from that novice to expert over time, effectively, retention is hinged on that relationship, right? If you lose, and I'm the latest stats are literally we lose 50% of our new grads within the first 2 years. And I would like to think that, this platform will help be the solution to those problems, right? Where educators or, folks that have been experts that have been in for years can very easily show what you need. And then you can take the reins and be empowered as a individual professional and motivated to continue on and grow in that safer knowledge and reduce the fear, right? Like there's nothing like the amount of fear that is seen in students and new grads, just because they have patients' lives in their hands. And that's a pretty big responsibility to take on, as healthcare professionals, and every level of safety net that we can give is beneficial and in helping bolstering the confidence. And so that they can confidently act in the moment as well, not just confidently brace themselves to go in and do what they do, but and take those new learnings, but to act in a new situation with a new patient and take that knowledge forward and apply it as we do, right? In critical thinking. And all of those expectations, if you don't actually have a quantifiable way of looking back and seeing how far you've come as a nurse and even as a junior nurse, like just even going through 4 years of your baccalaureate degree and looking back when you graduate and you appreciate it. But if you had a quantifiable skill set that is just right there in front of you that you can take with you, it just adds all of that a different level to your confidence when you move and transition and as you grow. You look back and go, wow, I know a lot. Or, you know what, I've forgotten something, right? And be honest with yourself and be able to fix that, right? The minute I go, you know what, it's been a hot minute. I haven't had a patient with, whatever it is that's going on. I have a really quick way to get what I know, and whether that's a checklist or whether, whatever it is that my educators and my managers have set out, I have quick access to it. And I know, how to fix that and feel confident to go into the moment. Those relationships are everything, right? And how you gain that confidence. And so it just boils down to, if you don't have those relationships, it's not a satisfying career, right? And it's hard to be confident with patients and build those relationships, because you do have to have a relationship with your patients too. And it's a relationship of trust. They're expecting that you are competent to do, the care that they need. So it comes circle, right? And it always comes back to the patient.
Yeah.
But there's just a lot of process behind how that nurse gets there.
And speaking of your platform, what challenges did you face when you were thinking about developing your solution, or even during the time that you're developing your solution?
Well, my original problem was actually that I was designing a solution for was actually the right nurse for the right patient at the right time. And so that's the very first ultimate problem, is that we didn't actually track those skills at an individual level. And so that was my very first pivot. And then that pivot led to, that's a lot of skills. And that's a huge amount of information and data. And then, of course, it comes down to the knowledge and skills to manage that data, right? And have the ability to find a software developer, that can make that feel easier, because it's a daunting task. I've talked about it with nursing colleagues at, previous conferences, and it is a big, ugly, audacious goal, right? And people look at that going, especially when you have a vision that big, right? That complex. And it's not a human complexity solution. It can't be. Like, it's just, we've tried that. We know that it's too complex to manage any other way. But we live in a different time now, and we have ways of making that data accessible, and take the insights and actually make it actionable and build off of it. And that's the bigger piece.
And speaking of technology, has AI impacted your industry?
What industry hasn't AI impacted? Yeah, absolutely it has. But of course, in true healthcare fashion, we're very cautious about the application of AI in healthcare. But I think what I took away from it is that we're making leaps and bounds in precision healthcare, which is basically focused on individual patients and making decisions on their actual clinical status and what they need. And I love that idea. And we talk about patient-centered care and all of that. And I think that when I transitioned from clinical nursing into education and into supporting educators and managers, I always needed to meet people where they are in order to bring them up. And it doesn't matter whether you're a student or whether you're an educator or a manager or, a senior leadership. We're all learning and we're all developing skills, and we all need to be met where we're at. Otherwise, we don't feel safe and we don't feel confident in moving forward, and whether that's making decisions independently or as a team, whatever the case may be. And so when you have AI factored into that, your clinical decisions are now being influenced by something. And if you don't really know the underpinning of how that was built, that can be a very scary thing, because at the end of the day, your professional license is on the line. And so again, being able to demonstrate the transparency of it is the hinge point for me for AI in healthcare, and the applicability, in my specific case of the platform really will show, how much easier it is to build, and add to it and then connect the dots later on. And we'll get to, automating some of those tasks that we don't need the person, to be doing. So, and there's a lot of that in education, right? We still need to communicate. That's really important. But how we communicate and making sure that everybody's set up for success it can be standardized a little bit better. And then we can actually create that opportunity for specific nurses to build, as they grow, as at their own rates, and move forward, the motivation to do it.
Yeah. It's interesting because, I use AI in my day-to-day tasks. And I know that at the end of the day, when I'm mentally fatigued, I'm much more likely to go with what AI is recommending versus what I know is right. And I just think it's it really is just fatigue, and I do worry about that in the healthcare system. And I do agree with you that I think automating tasks that can be automated that do not impact quality of care makes perfect sense. But if because we are human and we do get tired, if we tend to rely on AI maybe a little bit too much, I can see that definitely impacting patient care.
At the patient level, for sure, 100%. We have to be extra cautious with that, to the point where, as professionals, we still have an obligation, right, to understand what's happening in front of us and to override that, period, right? If that's the right thing to do. But when you talk about other components of it and how we get in the background, how we do what we do, and how we manage nursing skills and education and growing and learning new things, there's new devices nonstop, right? Patients are learning way more, way faster. There's devices where they can do their own ECGs now, right? Like all of those things, and the skills that are just at the patient level. How that growth happens so fast, you can't keep up to it as a health professional unless you have a transparent pathway, right, and an expectation. And so when somebody's making a decision somewhere of whether we're going to allow a patient to do or use a device within the system, or like there's all of those pieces that are factored in, but knowledge in general is just changing, and how we attain it. I think in the nursing world, it's not changing. We still practice, like we have a foundation of knowledge and then we apply it. And there's no two patients that are the same. There's no 2 days that are the same. And that's why our critical thinking is imperative, right? And that's what gives us that critical thinking too, is that experience of applying that knowledge in different ways over time.
Yeah. So if there was, one statement you can give yourself, if you can go back in time and tell yourself this one statement when you were first beginning your entrepreneurial journey, what would it be?
I'm a big fan of the Proverbs. It's all about courage, right? It's all about courage and fear. And the one that resonated the most with me that I hit, I think when I jumped originally and just went, was that courage is not the absence of fear, but rather the judgment that something is more important than the fear. And that hit and resonated on so many levels for me, because I've always been a fairly courageous person, and overcoming those fears is super important. I'm a critical care nurse. It doesn't get any scarier than that, right? When those patients come through the door, but it's over time, right? Like you still will run into fears over time, and you're going to do something different. And as an entrepreneur, that's probably the biggest thing as an entrepreneurial nurse, is because entrepreneurs and nursing aren't synonymous, right? Like we don't have a lot of, some call them nursepreneurs, right? Some of them have called themselves that. Like they're really coming out more. You see more and more of them nowadays, but it's newer, right? That we're taking on. I mean, doctors have probably been doing that because they've had clinics and business side of clinics for forever. And nurse practitioners are building a new world in that sense, right? As independent practitioners. And then we have different gaps where we can see and be passionate about. And so if you have that passion, you have to have that passion. You do. You have to have the passion in the area and the knowledge to make it happen. But know that that's just the starting point, right? You're always going to be learning. You're always going to be seeing a new perspective and meeting barriers that you're going to have to overcome. But there's nobody better than a nurse to do that. As a nurse, we need nurses everywhere. We have them in a lot of places, but we need nurses that have the capacity to take on those new realms of nursing and self-employed practice and enable nurses to do that.
Yeah, I agree. Well, thank you, Dawn. This has been incredibly insightful, and thank you for being so transparent about your entrepreneurial journey and the challenges you've encountered. And I'm sure our audience will take away a lot from your experience and your courage.
Oh, thank you. It's been wonderful, as always, chatting with you, Rea.
Wonderful. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed the show. Why not become a podcast host yourself? LIBI is a community podcast, and we would love to have your voice as a host or a guest. Check out show.libby.ca for more information, show notes, and links for every episode.
This episode is brought to you by New Idea Machine, a unique blend of a tech incubator and a software development powerhouse. We're not just building software, we're crafting the next generation of homegrown tech wizards. Got a project in mind or looking to hire fresh talent? Reach out and let's make tech magic happen. Visit newideamachine.com for more info.
Music for the show was created by Tony Del Degan.